Peyton, nice to see you again, this time in real life. So pleasurable, so enjoyable to be here with you on this beautiful sunny day. This time with a quote by Charlie Munger. He says, show me the incentives and I will show you the outcome. What are your thoughts, man? Share them with us.
Beautiful quote. Very powerful idea. And Charlie Munger is a guy that's got a lot of experience running and overseeing, especially overseeing, buying and investing in successful businesses of all kinds and all industries. And this is something that he's found as one of the most important common threads to success, regardless of what the day-to-day activities are going on. Regardless, the incentives that people are operating under have a huge causal impact on whatever the outcome is. Here's another quote that is something along the lines of, if you can be working on incentives, you shouldn't be working on anything else. And it's true ultimately that incentives as it relates to, and they come in many forms. It can be, what are employees rewarded to do? What are they punished for doing? What is something that generally is in the interest of the actual individual on the ground making the decision at a specific level. And it's a super pervading force in our world. If you think about just within a company, for example, if you have, let's say, somebody speaks up or points out a problem with something, and then they're forced to kind of go through a political rigmarole and a pain in the ass and suffer some consequences because they point out an issue, people will not point out issues. If when somebody brings an idea to the table, all of a sudden they're dumped with work for having a good idea and it's not shared equitably, then all of a sudden you have a bad incentive to bring an idea. Or on the other hand, if you really want to accomplish something as a company and you really want it to happen, yes, you can ask people to do what's in the best interest of the bigger picture. But a lot of times, if that conflicts with what's in their own best interest, human nature will almost always follow their own best interest. You can't fault people for doing what they believe is best for them. That's what ultimately everybody is always going to flow back to, is what they do believe is best for them, ultimately, however they see it, however they define it, on whatever timeline they're thinking of. And so what he points to is, if you want people to act differently, not just when you're looking, not just when you say something today, not just on a short-term, unsustainable basis, but you actually want it to be something that is an energy with a momentum that can carry on even when you're not looking directly at it. And for Charlie, this is important because he has a holding company where he doesn't really play an active role in these companies. He just has to find the right people, put the right people in the right place, and then incentivize them correctly. And that's sort of the extent to his management of a lot of these businesses. If you want the energy of what you are ultimately after to continue when you're not in the room, you must align incentives. You must make it to where it's not just in your best interest and you're asking a favor of somebody to do something. Rather, you are making it in their best interest as well. You want to achieve alignment with the people that are executing the mission at various stages, and in order that they are pushing forward their piece of the puzzle. So maybe it's not the whole big picture scenario result that you're incentivizing, but it's the thing that this person has specific control over that you're incentivizing. And by paying a lot of attention to this, you can, in some ways, have management energy there even when you're not there by aligning incentives. And it can be done in certain ways, in ways that perhaps are more of a more intentional allocation rather than even a large increase in cost if you're intentional and creative about how these things are rolled out, what you're incentivizing, and you're very targeted in your approach. And so I think that this principle and intentionality around this is one of the most powerful arenas that we can hope to work on in business, or even with our friendships and other areas of life, things that we want to happen. We should really be intentional about what is in this person's best interest. And if what's in their best interest to do and what's in my best interest for them to do are misaligned, that's a time when you should really be paying attention to the incentives if you want to achieve a good result. What do you think about incentives?
Yeah, man. We should watch out to not get screwed over, because people have their best interests in mind all the time. What we're looking for is win-win situations where we really uncover what is in their heart of hearts, what is in their what is their passion, what are they passionate about, and then try to kind of find a common ground, align the values and the deeds and actions to really have a good outcome in a mutual beneficial relationship to that. So show me the incentives and I will show you the outcome. This quote also refers to the fact that we can view everything as a system and model it and have an input, and then the system works on the input, and the output produced by the system is made out of the characteristic mechanizations of this system. And therefore, the incentives are kind of the functions, the forcing functions of the system to transform the input of the system to a certain output. And therefore, you should be really careful about incentives. What are incentives? It's kind of the things that people strive for and want to reach, and therefore putting energy and time into it so that they get a certain outcome. So our whole society works on incentives. It's a machine built with incentivized structures and around incentivized structures. Therefore, I go to work. Therefore, I work for my boss because he pays me a little bit of money. And I put my time and energy and creativity into building his system further. And therefore, this is a mutual beneficial relationship, because I get resources, he gets resources, and therefore we both generate more value than would have been created by ourselves. Also, this is a kind of resource allocation challenge. You have to find the right balance and the right alignment, obviously.
Yeah, and these incentives play such a role as well, not just within individuals, but it's once you see it, you can't unsee it as it relates to how various professions operate, how the experience you can expect to have with somebody doing this or somebody doing that is vastly different depending on their incentives. So, for example, in contracting and construction, you have very commonly bad experiences. Everybody's had nightmare stories with contractors screwing them over, taking a deposit and running, doing shoddy work and not fixing it, or cutting corners with the materials they buy to save a penny. And that's because they have bad incentives. There's largely one-time transaction, not recurring. And so because of that, I have more to gain from screwing this person over and trying to play zero-sum tug of war, where I try to get at least an extra $200 for myself out of each little transaction, because I know that I probably won't sell to this person again. And if I do, it'll be so far down the road, and they may not remember me, and I only have a few customers per year. And so I really don't need them to recommend me to other people, blah, blah, blah. If you have these bad incentives, it will lead to a lot of people being shady actors, because ultimately everybody is it's an evolutionary game. If you have a fitness advantage by taking advantage of people, then many, many, many people will take advantage of people. And then if you look at an opposite situation, let's say sellers of products on Amazon. If you have any issue with a product on Amazon, you can return it in 0 seconds, because first, Amazon is incentivized to keep you on the platform, not to make their sellers happy, because they have an abundance of sellers, but they always want more and more customers on their site. And so Amazon is incentivized to have crazy customer-friendly rules, even to a fault. And then if you go and look at some other professions, there's completely the opposite case, where customer service, they have more to lose from doing what it takes to appease you than they have to gain from making you happy. And it plays out in subtler ways too. It's not just a matter of good and bad, but it also is a matter of what people will push for. And so you of course have, there's an old phrase, don't ask the barber if you need a haircut, because of course he is incentivized to. And when somebody is trying to sell you something, they're not the person to ask if you actually need that thing, because they're incentivized. They make more money if you buy it. So of course they will be very biased to tell you yes. And in subtler ways, if you think about, for example, real estate agents, when I was first listing a couple of houses for sale, I was talking to real estate agents, picking them out. I found this guy, and I thought they were worth a certain amount, and he tells me we need to list it for 10% less or 15% less than that, something like that. And this is a case where he's not a bad person. He wasn't trying to screw me. He didn't have any bad intention, but he was following his incentive. Because for me, if we sell for 10% less, then that actually can mean, and I owe some money on the property and I have some transaction costs and things of this nature, that could mean that I net 30% less from the transaction, something like that. And I have the same amount of input, same amount of effort. I end up in a spot with much less money left over at the end of it. Whereas for him, if we list for 10% less and we list for a price that's below market, then he's going to get offers very easily. It's going to sell very fast, which will help his statistics of how many houses he's selling and how long it takes him to sell it. It will also be much less work for him because all of the buyers will be coming to him because he has something that's really cheap. And he's not the one that's netting much less money. He gets almost the same commission and net at the end of this regardless, plus or minus 5-10%, something like that. Whereas for me, the difference could be much more substantial, and the difference in work is very small for me. And so I know that in a situation like this, it's not that he's a bad person or I can't work with somebody like this, but I need to understand his incentives, because when he tells me to sell for 10% less, then I can ask myself, like, okay, is he telling me that, is that in my best interest, or is that something that makes his job much easier and maybe is not actually in my best interest? And so by asking myself, what is he incentivized to tell me? Then I know, okay, because he's incentivized to tell me this, I need to take this advice with a grain of salt. Maybe he's right and he's telling me the truth, but I should absolutely not take his word for it. And this is something that, especially when you have an agent of some sort, somebody selling something for you, a broker, yes, but also maybe a manager, somebody representing you, you have all kinds of principal agent problems where what is in the best interest of the principal, the person that owns, is not what's in the best interest of the person, of the agent, the person managing, the person selling, the person doing something. And so these are situations where all the time there's inefficiencies, and you must, as the principal, look out for your own best interest and understand if this person is misaligned with me, that it's not going to yield the best results for me unless either I align the incentives or I'm intentional and I assert my side of this and I make sure that I'm adequately pushing for this other side of the balance. And one other example of incentives that I always rave on is lawyers. I'm buying this office building right now, and the seller has a lawyer, and it's a fairly small transaction to the seller, to everybody, blah blah blah. And so, and it's fairly straightforward. The seller's a good person. I'm a good person. We're very. It's very possible for us to gain trust, and it should be very easy to just say, okay, we have this price, we have these terms, and then all these details we can be reasonable about, align on, and just get it done, get to an alignment, and go forward. The seller wants to get the money. The seller wants to move fast. I want to get the building. I want to move fast. Him and I are both aligned, but he employs this lawyer, and the lawyer does not get paid when the building sells, and the lawyer is not incentivized to have a fast and smooth transaction. The lawyer is paid based off of how many hours he can bill. And so if he can create a conflict in this contract where he says that it must be this, and he's being completely unreasonable, and then he's telling the seller some story to confuse him or to give him fear, that causes him to feel like he needs to trust him and go along, then we've wasted months. And I bet this lawyer has billed this guy maybe already 2 or 3% of the purchase price when it should have been maybe $200. Now it's thousands of dollars that this lawyer has gotten from this guy, while he is actually delaying the process and while he is actually working against the best interest of the person he represents. while trying to convince him that he's working in his best interest. And lawyers, you see all the time, people have frustrations with them. People are frustrated. And just like with contractors, where people don't like them, they're frustrated, blah, blah, blah. The lawyers is also a situation of bad incentives where they win they win by a different logic than by if their clients win, by if they're helping people, or if they're just getting in the way of things. Their incentives are bad, which leads to predictable behavior, and you can't even fault anybody for it.
No,
People always follow their incentives.
That goes into the same thing as Marcus Aurelius already quoted 2,000 years ago, where he said, "Don't be surprised by a vineyard producing wine grapes."
Yeah.
So it's the characteristics of the persons and their incentives and their way of being incentivized to do their job, whatever that produces the outcome. They want obviously the best for themselves and negotiate accordingly. And therefore, we must not be surprised by people being themselves, people being different, because everybody's wired differently, and everybody has some kind of characteristics that he or she wants to live out in a certain way. And therefore, we have to take responsibility for the situation and negotiate the best outcomes for ourselves as well. So the best way to do it is to really align with your values and your ideas of how to gain value. And this also is nice principal agent conflict and so on. But there's also an evolution to it, like you told. And there's this game theory behind it, and I guess Charlie Munger points to the game theory aspect behind it when he says, "Tell me the incentives and I show you outcome." Because game theoretically, you can just iterate step by step through the interactions between the people. And there's this kind of evolution of trust. And this is the simplest form of getting to know the characteristics of the system to really interpolate possible inputs to possible outputs. And there's this nice web game called Evolution of Trust, where you really see that if there are bad actors and good actors and naive actors and tit-for-tat actors, what kind of strategy is the best for different kinds of environments. So this is also very insightful to see that if you are in a wholly mutual beneficial relationship with everybody else inside a certain system, inside your neighborhood, for example, then everybody helping everybody creates the most value. But as soon as there is like 1 or 2, 3 bad actors inside that community, that will rot the whole apple pot. And this is really to be looked out for. Just put the rotten apples out of the basket.
Yeah. Yeah, and it has so much to do with also long-term games versus short-term games too. When you know that this person that you're across from is going to play iterated games with you, and you will be doing things over and over and over with this person, and this can be the case in many personal or business settings, then you can see that, okay, this is somebody that I can build with. I can err on the side of generosity with this person. I can build a trust. I can build a rapport, and ultimately the relationship will be very positive sum in the end because it's iterated. You work with each other, and there's synergies between cooperation, and the trust can build, and then you can have lower cost of checking, lower cost of transactions, and even find new opportunities to collaborate and use each other's strengths, or to lean on each other and trust on each other more. It can be extremely mutually beneficial to have these iterated positive sum games. But when games are just one-up, like when there's a transaction, for example, and you consummate the transaction, let's say there's a buyer and seller of a building, they buy and sell, and then they never see each other again. You have this, you have the money, and then we're done with each other. Those are the transactions where you really must watch out. You must assume that this person will defect if it is only a one-off, non-repeated game. And then if you are in an iterated game, you should look for, does this person understand what a positive sum game is? Does this person understand how to collaborate and to build trust and to build something positive sum in the long run? And if so, you should look to foster that trust, to build that possibility, because you can gain so much more from positive sum iterated games than you ever could from zero sum tug of war by trying to take $100 out of somebody's pocket and putting it in your own. You can make thousands of dollars by taking $100 from your pocket and putting it in someone else's, and then working together and collaborating to build something synergetic over the long run.
More value than you could have created on each other's own. And this is also like the compound interest of trusted relationships is much higher than just relationships that are one-off, and therefore being screwed over is fairly easy to do. But with iterated games, like you said, it's worth it to really double down on relationships that are trusted, mutually beneficial, and always win-win. And playing into this is also a nice story from the post-war period in Germany. As a government, should always be careful what to incentivize for, because it's more often done wrong than right and incorrectly than correct. For example, the case from Rüdiger Neberg, this German explorer and survival expert who crossed Germany without eating something else than worms or rabbits or whatever he found along the way, just to mimic the escape from the Amazonian forest, which he planned to visit because he wanted to advocate for these tribes there in the conflict with the gold miners. So much said, but in the post-war period in Germany, he was a boy living in the ruins of the bombed towns. And the government incentivized for rat tails. So what does a smart young boy do? He created a rat production inside the ruins of the buildings. And yeah, you get what you incentivize for. The same thing is with the cobras in India, where they incentivized for dead cobras. What happened? The people grew the cobras, and then the government slashed it, and even more cobras came along, and the problem was worse. So be careful what you incentivize for in top-down manner, because it will surely produce the outcome you incentivize for.
A specific outcome you incentivize for too. Yes, yeah, the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law necessarily. Yeah. So one thing that I find, just as a closing piece of advice, is in any situation you're in, whether you're an employee, whether you're an employer, whether you're in a transaction, whether it's on the personal side, whether you're trying to buy something that's a major purchase for you, or whatever the case may be, even looking across somebody and partnering and working together. Always ask yourself, what are the incentives? And use that to shape your negotiations. Use that to understand where you will need to push, where you will need to advocate, and where you will need to specify and be firm that this must be held to, because I understand that your incentives are going to be to push as far as you can on this particular front. And by doing that, we can be much more effective in getting the right side of these things and being efficient in our dealings and winning the long-term games.
Yeah, man. Don't be naive in your pursuits. Just be aware that everybody's different, that everybody has his own interests at heart, but also possibly others' interests, but primarily his own or her own. And therefore, don't be naive about one-term transactions and trust a stranger too much, because he surely or she surely will lead you to his best possible spot of negotiation.
Yeah.
One last closing story about when the Brits settled New Zealand.
Yeah, yes.
There was this incentive structure where the captains of the ships carrying the travelers who were primarily prisoners, I guess, they were incentivized by the number of people they took on their boat. Coming to New Zealand, the survival rate of those people was like 66%. It was like bad. And the captains talked to themselves, yeah, let's save on food, and then the people die off, and therefore we have much more gain from that. Uncovering that, the government realized its mistake and incentivized the people who come there alive.
Yeah.
That the captains get paid for the people who come to New Zealand alive. And the survival rate shot up to 99%. You get what you incentivize for. Don't be a sucker.
Very true.
So
Yeah.
may we be aware, may we not be suckers. Though I always learn new things because I get screwed over.
One of the best ways to learn.
Yeah, it's like educational fees that I pay.
Yeah, exactly. It's tuition, baby. Tuition. Yep. Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
Have a good week.